So this morning we had given our time over to beginning, and the beginning was to see as a kind of axiom for ourselves that great phrase that Newman was fond of, sola cum solo, being alone with God, and seeing in the wisdom of that axiom an aspiration that perhaps we could make as a firm fixture in our own spiritual lives. Not all the time, but I think maybe once a week it would be a good thing just to put aside, insofar as we can, other responsibilities, other obligations or concerns, and simply dive down deep to be alone with God, to take hold of what things are most important in our lives and to try to marginalize those issues and concerns that might get in the way of living our lives on the levels that we want. Living our lives on the level we want takes us to our second topic, the complexity of being me. English theologian Nicholas Lash has put this in a way that I have never seen bettered. He writes, describing the way we are, in fact, each of us, intolerably complex. And then he spells that out. We're confused, bewildered, bombarded by discordant signals and demands, subject to conflictual desires and motives, unstable moods, and fragile loyalties, driven by insecurity and ineffectively smothered by fear. By is left out there, I apologize. Ineffectively smothered by fear. I think that describes all of us. Sometimes we have good days when that's not always the case. But I think we can recognize ourselves in that's the way we are. We're not beings who see clearly and lucidly without any complications all of the time. That's the way we are. And of course, it doesn't always operate at a conscious level. And we might be awake, but it doesn't mean that we're conscious of all of these factors within our persona. Ask the ones closest to you what you're like, and they will tell you. They have a certain infallibility about their perceptions of us. But if that's the way we are, and we can't entirely stop being the way we are, that's called heaven. And if we can't entirely stop being the way we are, can we alter the way we are? And the answer is yes, we can. We can alter the way we are by God's grace and our own cooperation, perhaps in small ways, rather than with major and massive big strides. We can alter the way we are in small ways, and that's why psychologist Simon Park, in the second orienting comment, puts it well. He says, you alone are the alchemist of your humanity. An alchemist in medieval times was someone who could change base metal into gold. You are the one who can change the base metal of these dysfunctional characteristics of your persona into something more worthwhile. The power is given to you alone to turn base metal into gold, to turn such base energies as the ones we've already noticed, but he recounts them as fear, worry, anger, deceit, hatred, and delusion into generosity, openness, spontaneity, kindness, courage, and awareness. And he's right. We are the alchemists. It's very hard work. It's impossible to change someone else. It's really tough to change yourself. But at first, you have to have some kind of realistic handle on yourself and kind of spot in this delineation of characteristics the way I am. You know, where do I fit here? Well, we know that we fit somewhere there, but spending a little time, not a lot, focusing on perhaps the major dysfunctions I have, insofar as I'm aware of them, becoming more aware of them, can help me to become a better alchemist in my own regard. So that's something we have to do. When to do it, one of the things I would strongly recommend is every night we say our night prayers before we go to sleep. That's one of our regular practices as Catholics. And every night before you go to sleep, think of a good thing that you did today. A kind word, or some helping activity, a generous remark to someone. Think of a good thing you did today, and then take a moment to replay in your mind the video of the day and consider something that you regret doing. A word spoken, or something you didn't do that you could have done, something that you omitted. And then make your act of contrition. And I put it that way quite deliberately because when we examine our consciences, there's a great temptation to focus too much on the miseries that we are. And that's not healthy. That's not healthy. And that's why I say, begin with something good that you've done. And you can always think of something good that you've done. And then, of course, look at the things that you regret. That's, I think, a good way to regularly recognize the complexity of being me, of being who you are. There's a nice poem by Mary Oliver. If you don't like poetry, this week is going to be full of miseries for you. Mary Oliver is a very, very fine contemporary American poet. And in this poem, she brings us up short in a way that's healthy. The poem is entitled, When Death Comes. It's going to come to all of us. But in the poem, what she's going to recommend to us is live in such a way that you can perhaps not sing with Sinatra, regrets I've had a few, but that you can be on that side of the credit debit page. Live in a way that you're living to the full every day. And that's not with some kind of pagan exuberance, but rather with a Christian exuberance. Remember, we used the phrase this morning, enjoy God. Enjoying God means enjoying the giver of the gifts, yes, but the gifts given also. Living to the full. And that's what's behind this poem. Some of the images and metaphors that Mary Oliver uses might strike you as a little strange, but poets do that to make you think. So let's look at it. When death comes, like the hungry bear in autumn. I haven't come across a hungry bear in autumn, but I can imagine what it's like, you know. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me, and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measle pox, when death comes like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? I find that a very healthy kind of reflection. We have no absolute certitude what lies beyond the horizon of death. Our great hope, and it's a well-founded hope, is that we're stepping into the loving embrace of God. Yes? I'm not sure where she stands in terms of Christian beliefs and values, but that's a healthy, at least an immediately healthy response, to be full of curiosity going into the cottage of darkness. Now there's a change in the poem. Aware that death is going to come, I'm going to live life to the full. That's what she says. She says, and therefore, prefaced by the earlier lines, I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood. That's a fantastic aspiration, because so much of the time we live out of tribalisms, you know. My Catholic tribe, my American tribe, my white tribe, my male or female tribe, you know, the list can go on and on. But she says, cut through all of that and recognize everyone as a brother and a sister. And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy, and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does toward silence, and each body a lion of courage and something precious to the earth. So you get this sense that Mary Oliver is saying, I want to live. And so she continues then, when it's over, when death comes, I want to say all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom taking the world into my arms. Remember those marvelous days? Memories. When it's over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of argument. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. You know, visitors come and go. They don't necessarily have an investment in where they're going. They're here today and gone tomorrow. It doesn't matter all that much. I don't want simply to visit the world. I want to be invested in it. I want to find in the world, in all its multifarious, multifaceted, glorious nature, I want to find in it everything that exudes life and encourages joy and generosity and brotherhood and sisterhood and so on and so forth as the poem unfolds. I think there's a lot of value in that. Now you might think, well, that's okay for other people, but not for Catholics, because I think sometimes, perhaps this is too autobiographical, I think that sometimes there's a dark streak in the tapestry of our lives, which alerts us, don't go there, you know. Don't value the gifts of this world too much. Don't be too invested in the persons and places and events of your life because they're passing. That's dangerous thinking. Because if they're gifts, and this morning we encouraged us to see that everything is gift, if they're gifts, not to appreciate the gifts is a failure too. Okay, we're not awake. Appreciate the giver. If I'm recognizing everything as gift, and I'm treating everything as gift in the way that Mary Oliver was describing, then I'm recognizing the giver in appreciating the gifts. And I think it's a very important point for us because you're special people. You're being oblates, you're being committed Catholics, people of faith and grace. Wonderful. I'm in great admiration and feel humbled by your presence. But there can be a temptation in all of that. And I think the temptation is to see the spiritual life as something very precious, precious in a pejorative sense, something very narrow and remote and disconnected from the rest of life. There's a tendency to perhaps, or a temptation perhaps, to see the spiritual life as saying my prayers. Of course it's got to do with that. Going to Mass, of course it's got to do with that. And doing all the regular things that I do as an oblate of this house, of course it's got to do with that. But not in isolation. If the spiritual life were to be those things that I've just enumerated, classified, in isolation from the rest of life, then the rest of life is kind of like profane. But this bit is sacred. The rest of life is kind of secular. But this is where grace abounds. But you see, I think it's, in a sense, the other way around. The other way around, quite precisely, as the arena of grace is the whole of creation. And the things that we do that are particularly religious, our prayers, our novenas, our prayer patterns, our liturgy of the hours, our fasting, and all the other special religious things that we do, are like an intensification of the arena of grace that's all around us, not separate. And that's the temptation, to think of them as separate. In other words, that I'm at my best as God wants me to be when I'm doing holy things. The rest doesn't count. But I think, as I say, it's in a sense the other way around. We're at our best when we're flourishing in the entire arena of God's grace, which is everywhere that we are at all times. And that is intensified then in moments of prayer and meditation and sola cum solo, being alone with God. I think that's a good accent to emphasize as we move further into this particular area. One of my addictions, and one of the few that I will own up to publicly, is reading thrillers. She who must be obeyed is the less affectionate term I have for my spouse of 48 years. She says, you've always got your head in a book. I'm not sharing with you my non-liturgical response to that constant affirmation. I love to read. I have since I was a small boy. And one of my favorite things is to read thrillers. I don't know if you've read P.D. James. Love P.D. James? What a wonderful woman. I could go on for hours about P.D. James, not going to. But in one of her books, The Black Tower, there is a policeman, and he's the son of an Anglican clergyman. I mean, he doesn't bother with his faith very much. He's kind of grown up separated from the faith of his father. But he was always taken to and kind of guarded by a curate that his father had in earlier days, a Father Badley. And Father Badley, he noticed as a small boy growing up, was constantly writing things down in a little notebook. And so as this particular thriller progresses, he comes across Father Badley, who's now towards the end of his life. And he says to Badley, you know, as a small boy, I remember you writing down all these things that must have had to do with your holiness and trying to be good and trying to be spiritual and religiously observant. And this is what Badley says. It's what you have as a bolded sentence there. This is the spiritual life, says Father Badley, the ordinary things one does from hour to hour. I love that. This is the spiritual life, the ordinary things one does from hour to hour. Intensified, of course, when we're at prayer, etc., etc., but not less real, the ordinary things that one does from hour to hour. Saying thank you, holding a door for someone, trying to think better of someone when their character is perhaps being ripped apart by someone in your hearing, you know? This is the spiritual life, the ordinary things one does from hour to hour. What we want to do now is parse that. What are the sorts of things that the ordinary things we do from hour to hour, and how by examining these a wee bit more, we can find ourselves drawn into a closer communion with God and a sense of being sola cum solo, and a sense of living in the way that makes us less dysfunctionally complex. So I want to sort of hit on those things. A book I read in the early 1980s as a much younger professor of theology by Donald Nichol puts it quite superbly. It's almost as if he's taking that sentence from P.D. James and parsing it. This is what Nichol says. Holiness means, can you see where I am? Yes. Holiness means assuming total responsibility for all that we are, and not simply for how we appear to other human beings, or, this is difficult, even how we project ourselves to God. Yeah. Our daily life is the matter, so to speak, which we are meant to transform into holiness. This insight awakens us to the exhilarating truth that every single moment of our daily life, every experience at whatever time and at whatever place, can serve and is meant to serve as spiritual exercise, so long as we, by our attitude, recognize that the experience is meant for that purpose. Every single experience of our daily life is grist for the grinding stone of holiness. No experience is wasted. From every single event in our daily lives, we learn about ourselves and thereby come closer to our true selves. By the same token, we come closer to the Holy One, who is even closer to our true selves than we are. It's a good passage. Every single experience. So let's examine some of our experiences from this point of view. I'm going to talk later on about prayer, and so I'm not going to reiterate what I want to say just now. I'm taking all of our special prayerful practices for granted, all of our spiritual exercises. Now I'm looking at the ordinary things one does from hour to hour. And as we go through this list, I'll comment on each one. There are 16 comments. Try to see for yourself where you need to do more work, because we all fit into this list. And some will be of a greater priority for us than others, but only you can know that. So, the first thing is having a robust, varied, and daily spiritual routine, the daily work of conversion. That is so obvious as really to need no comment. You need a daily routine. You need a daily schedule. If you're like me, unless I've got something working on a daily schedule, Father Stephen Clovis is making fun of me. But I won't get mad, I'll get even. As our Lord says in the Gospel. Having a daily spiritual schedule is essential. You know, if you don't put things into your planner or your diary or calendar, whatever you use, you forget them, right? Dental appointments, doctors, a grocery list, that kind of thing. Well, the spiritual life, your life of prayer, isn't any different. It needs to be programmed in, you know. When are you going to say your evening prayers? Or when are you going to go to confession? When are you going to do X, Y, or Z? You know what I'm saying. Program it like you would anything else, or it's not going to happen. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need to basically like life. Being enthusiastic and not complaining. You know, that's easier sometimes to achieve than it is at other times. When things are going well, it's easy enough to like life, isn't it? But what if we had that inscribed on our minds every morning? It would make a difference. I've gotten into the habit every morning as I awake, and both of us together use this in our morning prayers, a line from one of the Psalms: awake, I am content in your presence. You are, of course, meaning God. Awake, I am content in your presence. And we both find that if we start off like that, the day goes better. And that's liking life, you know? That's liking life. Being a day maker, you sometimes hear it called that. Being a day maker, and we know what the opposite of being a day maker is like. How are you? Oh, I'm terrible. It's been, oh, come on, you know. That's almost blasphemy. And I'm choosing those words carefully. It's when someone is not seeing the opportunity for liking life and being enthusiastic, in a sense, they're refusing to acknowledge the gift of the day given by the giver of all good gifts, liking life. You can build that in yourself. The third characteristic of holiness and eliminating dysfunction from our lives is growing and learning from all experiences. Now, it's easy to learn and grow from good experiences, right? So the doctor says to you, clean bill of health, you're good for another 15,000 miles. You feel good, you know, life, that's good. Oh, I I think you may need to have a scan. You think? I think the technical term is, oh shit, no, what's happening to me? But what if we really programmed ourselves to learn from all experiences? I think it would make the smooth running of our spiritual lives even better. One therapist for whom I have much regard, Mary Pfeiffer, writes, most of the, you don't have this in your packet, most of the craziness in the world, violence, addictions, and frenetic activity comes from running from pain. Healthy people face that pain. That's learning from all experiences. 15 years ago, a friend of mine who used to be on the collegiate faculty here and was also a deacon, he was a deacon of this diocese, Loris Bucola, died of ALS. And he didn't live too far from me in Silverton. We were in touch. And I remember him saying, Owen, ALS is deadly, but not serious. On the day he died, he was a counselor. On the day he died, he had appointments set up. He had them set up. He was enthusiastic about life. He wasn't running from his pain and all of the negative consequences that ALS brought upon him. He was virtually immobile at the end in one of those wheelchairs that can do all the different things for you. ALS is deadly, but not serious. I hope that if I get to a situation as difficult as Loris's, I'll be able to say something like that. Learning from all experiences. Number 4, knowing the meaning of forgiveness for themselves and others and not being resentful. Forgiveness is such a healing medicament in life. And the opposite of it is so destructive, for yourself especially, and for others to whom forgiveness is not extended. You're eroding something of your good self by being an unforgiving person. So being able to forgive, and especially to forgive yourself. In a sense, I think it's easier to forgive others than it is to forgive yourself. But if you don't forgive yourself, in a sense, that's a kind of blasphemy also, because the God who loves you with a passion recognizes the bad things you may have done, the ill things that you have done, but that's not what is in the forefront of his consciousness of you, because he has a passion for you. And so I think it's important to know the meaning of forgiveness for oneself. One author has written, to the resentful eye, everything is begrudged. People who have allowed the canker of resentment into their vision can never enjoy who they are or what they have. They are always looking out towards others with resentment. Perhaps they are resentful because they see others as more beautiful, more gifted, or richer than themselves. The resentful eye lives out of its poverty and forgets its own inner harvest. We have an inner harvest. Grace is at work in our lives and all around us. And so that should enable us to be forgiving, not only towards others, but towards ourselves. These markers of holiness overlap, of course, they're obviously not entirely discrete. Number 5, being habitually compassionate for both neighbor and self. I think, in my opinion, in my experience, I'm 32 years ordained, working with people. Catholics are very compassionate. When a crisis comes along, a national crisis in the country or internationally, they put their hands in their pockets and they help. They're compassionate. They reach out to those who are more needy than themselves. That's just, I think, the way things are, typical in Catholicism. But they're not always compassionate towards themselves. They're not always nice towards themselves. Catholics are not nice towards themselves so often. So we need to develop that ability to be compassionate in a holistic way for myself and, well, also for others. I need to recognize that, yes, I cause injury to other people in all kinds of ways, but compassion impels me to reach out to heal those injuries. Don't know if you're familiar with the English poet W.H. Auden, but he put it in a remarkably fine way that once you hear it, you'll never forget it. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. Isn't that great? You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. We're all crooked, you know. But compassion invites us to reach out in a more benign and careful way to the others and ourselves. Number 6, being non-worriers, not agonizing over things which are not in one's control. So much isn't it the case? I mean, there are some things that are within your control, not much, certainly not your children. We do our best, and we are invited by our gracious God to let them be. But we don't, and we keep poking our fingers and noses in and so on, and it never does any good. A friend of mine recently was visiting one of her children in an eastern state, I can't remember which one. And she's a mature young woman. She's in her early 30s. And she's dating this guy who's not a Catholic. So my friend is concerned about this because she's a very faithful and devout Catholic. So we had a conversation before she left to visit her daughter. She said, well, I need to bring up this religious thing. And I said, well, why? Do you think they don't know that you think about this? Do you think that they don't know how seriously you take this? Of course they know how serious this is for you, what an essential part of life that is for you. But once you bring it up in this kind of way, worrying about it, fretting about it, trying to control the outfall of a relationship, you just make matters worse. So don't be a worrier, because once you start into that, it becomes infectious. You know, one author puts it like this: even when you don't feel calm, learn to act calm. Anxiety, anger, and despair are infectious. Anxiety, anger, and despair are infectious. You know what it's like? Well, we know what infection is like for the last 18 months. Well, these are infectious things, you know. I remember once, this is going back a long time, I'm a garrulous old man, so I get into storytelling. I had a student in class whom I can only describe as rigid. He knew it all. He was a first-year theology student. So he'd come to class with a ton of books, which is nice to see if they're used. But on this particular occasion, and I don't think anyone here knows who it is, I'm not going to say any names, and he wasn't from this diocese or a neighboring one. That's for Mrs. Schrumm's benefit. Anyway, it was a seminar, and in the seminar we have all kinds of ethnicities, as you know, in our classrooms. There was a young man from the Philippines, and it was his turn to summarize and offer comments on a passage from the required textbook. Okay? They're nervous. And so I said to Felipe, we're ready for you. And so Felipe did his best, but he hummed and he hawed, and he wasn't great at delivering what he was supposed to do. This other guy, let's call him Beelzebub. Nice neutral name. He came in right away. He said, no, that's not it. And he proceeded to correct Felipe. And that really got up my nose. So I said, Beelzebub, shut up. That's a fairly unambiguous request. You know? I said, you are just being so hurtful. That was it. And he did shut up. All the heads went down, you know, because I'm usually a bit of a cream cake in class, you know. Well, that was the morning. By dinner time that night, did you hear what Cummings said to Beelzebub? It had grown out of all proportions to a fairly mild shut up, you know. It becomes infectious. That's what I mean. And everyone suffers. So, just to finish the story, Beelzebub came to me the next day and said, you have utterly spoiled my reputation on the hilltop. I said, I think you overestimate my powers. What do you want me to do? I want you to apologize. I said, I'll do that. So the next day we had class, I said, I want to apologize for saying Beelzebub was rigid. After class he came to me and said, you apologized for saying I was rigid. I said, that's right, I shouldn't have said it. You are bloody rigid. That's the end of the story. Okay, now we're going on to number 8. Is that right? I think I've done 7. So number 8 is, no, I'm sorry, you're right, number 7. I beg your pardon. Living in the present simply because the present is all one has. You know, today is the only day we have. We hope for tomorrow, and the past is behind us. And so every single day you have a choice. Live in mystery or live in misery. You live in misery when you start picking over the past. You know, like a scab that's not healing. Huh? You live in mystery when you recognize, as I mentioned earlier, awake, I am content in your presence. The day is full of mystery because it is embraced by the God who loves us inordinately. Living in the present rather than trying to project some kind of future outcome that you never really can do. Number 8, not constantly seeking approval from others and having a strong sense of inner direction, not being overly upset by others' negative comments. Not everybody likes you. That's life, right? You come across people, and it's no different in the church than it is in any other institution in the world. Sometimes people coming to a parish to work for the first time expect it to be a little foretaste of heaven, and they find out it's a foretaste of somewhere else sometimes. No, people don't always like you because we're differently put together, different temperaments, different approaches to things and so on, and some kind of tension, irritative tension is just part of life. If you're overly upset about it, it's not good. That's not good. G-O-I, get over it. Huh? Just get over it. Don't be overly upset at what people say. And then don't also try to restrain what they say, you know. Let it happen and get on. And usually things never reach proportions that are cosmic, you know. The sky doesn't fall. and things go on. Number 9, being strikingly independent, respectful of others' rights to make decisions, and encouraging self-reliance. That can be a tough one. As Catholics, we of course are in every possible way trying to be docile, obedient, dutiful in all the best senses, right? If you weren't, you wouldn't be a Catholic. But there may be times, and there could be issues, with which, because of existential circumstances, you find yourself in some element of disagreement. I'm going to come to this tomorrow. Well, that's okay. A certain self-reliance is a very healthy mark of being human. We're not a piece of blotting paper. I'm dating myself by using that as an example. Does anybody remember what blotting paper is? Yeah, okay. We're not blotting paper that simply soaks up ink. We interpret things. So being self-reliant is a very good thing. Number 10, finding joy in the world of nature. We spoke a little bit about that this morning. And enjoying God, enjoying the gifts that the gift giver has given us, especially the gifts of nature. Don't you find your spirit soaring when I mentioned the coast this morning, or we're in a very lovely part of the world. We like to walk up around Silver Falls, As something happens to you. What is it that's happening to you when you see this glorious foliage all around you, or watch the cascading waterfall and hear its sound? It's God inviting you to praise. The world of nature can build up your spirits in such a beautiful way. Number 11, refusing to engage in useless fighting, but spending a lot of time and energy in helping others, and especially through acknowledgement and praise. Have you ever noticed with small children how a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down? Acknowledgement and praise works miracles. When they do naughty stuff, and I don't think it's just my children and grandchildren that do naughty stuff, they know it, and they're waiting for you to come out with 6 guns blazing and declare the OK Corral fight out, It never works. It never works. Acknowledgement and praise always work. I'm not talking about superficial acknowledgement and praise, because that is manipulative. I mean felt and real acknowledgement and praise. That simply always works wonders. Acknowledging that your spouse is more beautiful and sexier than she or he actually is a wonderful thing, because they know it's not true. But they're seeing you saying it's true and acknowledging their worth, and it does good things. I wish it happened to me occasionally. Number 12, being careful in one's framing of others. Although if I had to isolate one of these baby steps as being of singular importance, this would be it. Being careful in one's framing of others. It seems to me that we live in a very polarized country. Think of the politics and the dysfunction that characterizes politics, at least in its publicness. Think of that in our church, because it's in our church. There are people who are self-styled traditionalists, and there are people who are self-styled progressives in our church. I don't see any way around that. A Catholic must be a conservative in the sense that she wants to conserve the best of the tradition so that it can be handed on to the next generation. But if she's got anything between the ears, she's also thinking for herself. and maybe in that sense progressive. We're both and. But framing someone is always is something you cannot avoid. You're doing it now with me, and I'm doing it with you when I have conversation with you and so on. You can't avoid framing someone. I mean by that interpreting someone, what they're like and so on and so forth. But you can't avoid this. If you can't avoid framing someone, you can avoid thinking that what you see in the frame is all there is to be seen. Can you see the difference there? And we don't feel like that, especially if it's a tension situation. We think we've got it nailed, exactly. And it ain't necessarily so. I love to tell this story of a former colleague. His name was John Hull, and he was the professor of education, of religious education in a university in England in which I taught. John went completely blind in midlife. It was some kind of genetic thing. He had children he'd never seen. And one of the lessons he used to teach to students who were doing a master's in education was he would take them down. We had a small art museum on the campus. He would take them in. He knew the art fixtures very well from having been a sighted person, but he'd ask them to bring him over to a particular piece of art. And he got half a dozen students standing around him, and he would say, "What do you see there?" Or, in terms I'm using, "What are you framing here?" And the students would tell him what they saw. And then he'd say, "What about the upper right-hand corner?" And they'd look, "Oh, didn't see that initially." And he'd do that kind of thing. And of course, the penny dropped. There's more in this picture than you initially can see. Open your eyes and see more in the frame. And that's what I'm talking about here. Number 13. Trying to be healthy physically and not letting illness get you down and treating our bodies well. Needs no comment. I'm not into gyms and Zumba and all the rest of it, I'll walk when I have to, I hate when someone says, "Did you do your walk today?" Anyway, we should take care of ourselves as best we can without becoming over-concerned about this. Father Timothy Radcliffe, whom I cited earlier in the day, commenting on the fourth commandment. Remember the fourth commandment? Honor thy father and thy mother. When I was being brought up, we took that as a matter of obedience. Being obedient to your parents. I mean, when you're getting ready to make your first confession, that's what you have to confess, Honor your father and your mother. Respect them. Father Radcliffe gives a slightly different twist to that commandment. Your mum and your dad gave you the body you have. Of course, God is the ultimate giver of the gift. But your mum and dad gave you the body you have. You honor them by treating it as best you can. Nice comment. Okay, number 15. Possessing self-discipline, but not being organizationally neurotic. I'm a little bit like that. I've not been diagnosed as OCD, but I'm going down that path, I think. I like to know where things are. I like to put things in the place where I expect to find them. Hang up your car keys, put your planner in your briefcase, you know the kind of, put your glasses on the end table in exactly the same place so you can get them in the morning. I am married to a woman who is the opposite of this. Now, I'm not making this up. Do you know where my glasses are? No, I didn't can't see them. Where's my planner? She's a therapist, so she has appointments. I don't know where your planner is. Do I have any clean panties? I said, well, I'm not the one who wears them, Take responsibility and be organized as best you can without being neurotic. And then lastly, number 16, having high energy levels, being seldom, if ever, bored. One of the things I hear my grandchildren say, mainly to irk me more than anything else, I'm bored, Granddad. Have you ever heard that?
Yeah.
Well, I try to say in as kindly a fashion as I can muster, that's your issue. There are books to read, there are things to do, there are games to play. If you say you're bored, you're giving up on your own resilience to cope with the kinds of issues that come your way every single day. Okay. That is true, Don't be bored. I never go anywhere without a book. That's an addiction. Because if you're waiting for your doctor's appointment, is he ever on time? No. So you're waiting in the waiting room, terrified of the one who is going to draw your blood and wondering if she's properly trained and will she do it in one shot or are you going to be poked 5 times? Bring a book, and then you reduce the fear and you're not bored. So what I'm trying to say is that, go back to the opening comment from Nicholas Lash, the very first citation. We are, in fact, each of us intolerably complex, confused, bewildered, bombarded by discordant signals and demands, subject to conflictual desires and motives, unstable moods and fragile loyalties, driven by insecurity and ineffectively smothered by fear. And then Simon Park, you alone are the alchemist of your humanity. If you see yourself in any of these 16 issues, change it. It won't be overnight, it's a lifetime's work, but it's liberating, healing, and all of it enables you better to be sola cum solo. Thank you. Now, do we have time for conversation, Ariel? I did bring my schedule with me. I did have 3 o'clock down, I apologize.
How do you write solo cum solo? Is that the same word first as last?
Is this a board that you can?
Yeah.
Let me spell it just in case it is. Sola is S-O-L-A. It means alone. It's the feminine form of the adjective in Latin. It's feminine because anima, the word for soul, is feminine. So sola is the soul alone. Cum, C-U-M, with. And then solo has a capital L, a capital S, S-O-L-O. It's the ablative case of solus, and it refers to God. Sola cum solo. If you use it at a cocktail party, Donna, you will get free drinks. Yes, please.
I think you skipped number 14.
Did I? Oh, maybe there's good reason for having skipped it. Thank you. Avoid spending time talking about others on what they've done or failed to do, not gossiping. Now, let's be honest. We all like a good gossip. Sometimes it's just catching up, isn't it? Catching up today from where you left off 6 months ago or whatever. That's a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But it very easily can shift gears into Character assassination. You know, did you hear what she did? Did you hear what he said? Well, first of all, you didn't see what she did. You didn't hear what he said. But when you concede to that, then diabolic things happen. Diabolos, dividing people, you know. Them and us, the goodies, the baddies, the cowboys, I can't say Indians, and the indigenous peoples. I'm learning slowly. It's not good. It's not good. I think more harm. Listening to people over the years in different situations in the parish, I think it does more harm than anything else. I remember attending one man who was from Bethlehem in Israel, but had lived most of his life in our country. And he was dying, and he was on his own. Most of his relatives were back there in the Holy Land. And he had emphysema, so his breathing was really difficult, and he knew he was going. And so I was just sitting, talking to him, listening to him. And he said, I'm leaving this world with a lot of regrets. I tried to say kindly and gentle things. God understands, which is true. He said, I have had such a vicious tongue. I have had such a vicious tongue all my life, hurting people quite deliberately, and then hurting people less deliberately and face-to-face by gossiping and so on. So Ali was his name. I said, well, you're sorry. You can't do anything about the past, but the very way you're expressing yourself is as close to an act of perfect contrition as I could ever imagine, you know. Umpteen things like that when people are in extremis, when they're in real difficulties, their regrets have to do with things they've said, you know, gossip. And so it's a good thing to avoid it. Sorry I leapt over that, but thank you for bringing it to my attention. Anything else? Yes, please.
Just a comment on spending alone time with God once a week. The last couple of years, I need to spend alone time with God every day, at least 15 minutes. If I don't, it's almost like I'm addicted to it. I can't find that peace, and I'm anxious. So if I give Jesus 15 minutes every day, I'm grounded.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. When I was recommending once a week, I would say I was recommending the optimal minimum, if I could put it like that. Now, I'm thinking of one of my sons and his wife have 4 children ranging from 17 to 2. The 2-year-old is the one who says, yeah, whatever. Busy people, chauffeuring kids around, at least, you know, leaving the pandemic aside, to sports activities and the swimming pool and you name it. Busy people don't always have the freedom to carve out even a small amount of time every day. And that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of, you know. But to be able to do that for 15 minutes a day, outstanding. Outstanding. I think, do Oblates pray the Liturgy of the Hours with the monks? The Liturgy of the Hours offers ample opportunity for doing this. You don't have to race through a psalm, you know, you can stop at a line that just, whoa, linger with that line. You know, there's one of the lines that comes immediately to my mind. I can't remember the numbers of the Psalms. I mentioned one already. As I awake, I am content in your presence. And there's another psalm, it's in the 50s. In the morning, fill me with your love. Now you could linger with that for 15 minutes, you know. So you're right. The more frequently regular we can make it, the better it is. But if we're very busy with obligations and duties and responsibilities, carving out a special time during the week, which we won't change, you know, to be sola cum solo, optimal minimum. Thank you for that. Please.
Well, I'm having a little trouble with number 9, especially the last part of it, encouraging self-reliance. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Right. I'll comment a wee bit more on it tomorrow.
Okay.
But in the short run, perhaps I could say this. Yeah, whatever, 2-year-old. I want her to do what I say. Yeah? So as to avoid trouble and danger and putting herself into possibly injurious circumstances. So complete docility, obedience is required there. I don't think it is of a 20-year-old. I expect a 20-year-old to be able to make her mind up in a responsible way about the decisions she will choose, rather than simply to reflect the moral ideals and choices that I would have her make. Does that make sense? That's what I mean by self-reliance. It's not a recipe, nor an encouragement for a laissez-faire morality or a laissez-faire attitude to life. Do whatever you like. That's not it. But when we encourage self-reliance, rather than an ongoing pattern of paternal dependence, people can get lost in life, you know, and find themselves in very difficult circumstances. So that's what I mean by self, you know, something like that. But I'll say a wee bit more about it tomorrow. Good comment.